I love the way the Big Ten TV deal is structured, right? It's a lot like an NFL type of Sunday on a Big Ten college football Saturday. It is the one, count it, one good thing that Kevin Warren did during his time as commissioner of this great conference was really structure this game, of course, with Fox and their investment in the noon slot right off the bat. We know, we've talked about it many times. A lot of people have talked about it many times, the amount of big games that are in that slot right away to kick off your Saturday. CBS in the 3:30 Eastern time slot, and then NBC in the prime time window. And then you kind of factor in some of these secondary networks that broadcast, and then getting into streaming with these Peacock exclusive games, both for football and then basketball and some other sports Peacock has been able to jump in on certainly as well. But when you look at last season specifically in football, and you really look at how these games were distributed, and then you kind of look at some of these early television announcements, some of which that we covered earlier on in the show, it starts to creep into your mind, doesn't it? Is CBS getting screwed a little bit? Are they getting the short end of the stick a little bit in this Big Ten television deal? Let's explain. Let's dive into it. Now, in order to really explain this, in order to really dive into this, we got to kind of outline the facts within this deal. Fact number one. Fox is the undisputed king of this TV deal. Fox owns 61% of the Big Ten network. Okay? They invest the most money into this television package. The Big Ten and Fox relationship, ever since it started, I think that was like the early to late 2000s, early 2010s, I believe, is really when that thing started to get kicked off. Like, it has been a marriage that I think has worked out extremely well for both parties. Big Noon is not going anywhere, folks. I know there's a lot of people that want it to go places, but it's not going anywhere because it is a success for the network. It is a success for the conference, and maybe most of all, it is success financially for the schools within this conference. But then you kind of get to CBS and you get to NBC. Let's rewind back to 2024. Who was going to get one of the biggest games of the year, right? It's a rule where home games on the West Coast cannot be Big Noon. You can't be at 9 a.m. local kickoffs because that's ridiculous. So now, who was going to get that big game last year? One of the biggest games of the year, October 12th, 2024, Oregon and Ohio State. It was on NBC. It was on Big Ten Saturday night. And then you look at some of the offerings that CBS had last year. Now, a caveat is they had the Big Ten championship game, and that was a fantastic championship game, and that was clearly atop the marquee and atop the banner for the 2024 television season that was CBS. But then when you kind of look at it throughout the course of the regular season, I already mentioned the marquee game that NBC had on. The Ohio State-Oregon regular season game. We know the type of regular season game that Fox has. The Ohio State-Michigan game. They had Texas and Michigan at the beginning of the season. They had Ohio State and Penn State. Like, they're going to have big marquee games every single year. When you have the first 3 draft picks in the TV draft, no matter what, every single year, yeah, you're going to have big games. Now, CBS is sitting there. You look back at CBS's really marquee games. Now, you had good games. Like Penn State, Minnesota was a really good game, but with all due respect to the Golden Gophers, that's not a game that really catches the marquee, maybe pulls in a ton of ratings like the aforementioned Fox games, like that aforementioned NBC game that was in the middle of the season last year. So the big marquee games for CBS last year were involving USC. USC and Notre Dame at the end of the year. USC and Penn State was on the same weekend as Ohio State and Oregon, USC and Michigan a little bit earlier on in the season. Now, all of those carry, I think, some pretty decent weight, but they don't carry the weight that Fox had. They don't carry the weight that midseason game on NBC certainly had as well. You fast forward to 2025. In theory, it looked like NBC had the number 1 pick last year, and they picked the game that they picked. You looked at this year, there was one game on the schedule, one game on the calendar that'd be like, well, maybe this is the opportunity for CBS to get a big time marquee type of game. That was the rematch of the Big Ten championship game that aired on CBS last year, the Oregon Ducks and the Penn State Nittany Lions. But that one, for the second consecutive year, that big game in the middle of the season is going to be on NBC. Right now, here are some CBS games that are on the calendar. Penn State and Nevada. You have USC at Purdue. You have Michigan at Nebraska. Those are good, but I think CBS is used, and I think we are used to CBS when we hear that music. We're used to that being a top-tier, marquee type of football game. And I think it's kind of creeped into some people's minds, both in the Big Ten and maybe outside of the Big Ten, that this CBS game doesn't really pack the punch that I think it has in years past. But I think you need to dive into the money a little bit. Okay? CBS was paying $300 million for 15 first-tier SEC games their final year of that deal with the SEC. Now, they're paying more now. They're paying $350 million per year in this Big Ten deal. I believe CBS and NBC are kind of both paying the same. It's equal, which I think also kind of reaches back into your mind and saying, why aren't these big-time games alternating between CBS and NBC? It makes you think maybe behind the scenes, maybe CBS is making some sort of deal to have another big marquee game a little bit later on during the season. More on that possibly here in just a minute. But they're paying $350 million per year in the Big Ten deal right now. It is believed, though, to be less than what ESPN is paying right now. And that was the big crux. That was the big breaking point in the negotiations between the SEC and CBS, is CBS just wasn't willing to pay as much money for those top-tier rights, and ESPN certainly was. So I'm curious, because there's really one other huge, big, marquee game on the schedule. It's Ohio State and Penn State. Now, what did we mention earlier in this commentary? We talked about how Fox has the top 3 picks. We mentioned Texas and Ohio State. We mentioned Ohio State and Michigan. Ohio State and Penn State has been a Fox staple. That seems to me to be that game that would end up on Big Noon on Fox. But maybe there are some things going on behind the scenes where that was CBS's number 1 pick. If that is the case, that is a ratings giant. That is a big time later in the season type of game that can certainly draw a lot of interest for CBS right now. But I think like expectations needed to be adjusted for CBS coming into this deal, considering the level that Fox was at and the big games that they were going to get. And then you got to split the difference in the second tier with NBC. There weren't going to be as many top marquee type of games. Having the Big Ten certainly being the best conference in college football, I think is going to help the depth, help CBS maybe get more quality games throughout the season. But this all kind of leads me into my last point. And then this will lead me into the next segment here of the show. Is CBS, I think, should be pushing for a 4-4, 2-2, 1-1 college football playoff format in the future, because those play-in games where you have 1 versus 2 to possibly get the bye, 3 versus 6, and then 4 versus 5, it works chef's kiss. Picture perfectly to have one network have the Big Ten championship game and then have NBC or CBS or whatever combination to have those other play-in games. Though that is some big time inventory, no matter who matches up in a potential play-in game on CBS or whether they have the Big Ten championship game, whatever that weekend looks like. We know television networks run the sport. We know that they have a high influence on the sport. We know that the Big Ten, Tony Petitti, are big backers to this AQ 4-4, 2-2, 1-1 playoff format. It could be networks like CBS, like NBC, and even like Fox, because now they're not getting that Big Ten championship game every single year. But I think they might be pushing to be like, hey, yeah, we'll pay a couple extra bucks, but we certainly want those big time games at the end of the season.